Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Progenitor. This is the show where we go over a director's entire filmography, talking about themes, scenes, pacing, and give a brief review, all within 30 minutes or less. So let's get started. This is a foray into a new genre from Sir Ridley Scott, and that genre is the spy genre. It is not like Bourne Identity, it is not like Bond. This is more of the on the on the ground grunts, more like Spy Games. If you've never seen Spy Games, it's one of Tony Scott's best films with Brad Pitt. This film is very much like that, except instead of Brad Pitt and Robert Redford, you have Russell Crowe and Leonardo DiCaprio. So I'm going to give a quick plot description. You have Roger Ferris, played by Leo. You have Ed Hoffman, played by Crowe, and you have Hani Salam, played by Mark Strong. Now, they make up the triumvirate of pretty much the intelligence in this film. Ed Hoffman is Roger Ferris's supervisor, and he is operating from Washington, D.C., whereas Roger Ferris is doing all the groundwork in the Middle East, learning the customs, learning the culture, and assimilating within the culture and trying to understand who he's going after. Whereas Ed Hoffman is pretty much just looking for a promotion. Then you have Hani Salam, the head of Jordanian intelligence, pretty much. And he is trying to infiltrate by putting his own people into the terrorist organization, who they are trying to get one of the high-ranking terrorist leaders named Al Salim. So now these three end up working together, and there's a lot of twists and turns. They turn against each other. They try to work together. Ed Hoffman is always trying to do a one-up on Hani Salam without letting Roger Ferris know. So all of a sudden, like, these three guys are never on the same page. There's a lot of red tape bickering, but at the end of the day, they are able to infiltrate Al Salim and capture him. Thank God, right? So that is a really brief description. There's a lot going on in between, and the movie's almost, I think it's like two hours and 10 minutes or so, but it actually moves pretty briskly. Although there's a lot of twists and turns, there's a love interest, there's just a lot going on, especially with all the all the complexities of the plan that Roger Ferris comes up with. So Roger Ferris comes up with a plan to create a quote unquote fake terrorist cell, that is trying to, become more dangerous than Al Salim, so that Al Salim will get jealous and get over prideful and try to find this terrorist cell and, try to capture the guys. So basically, that was Roger Ferris's plan before it just goes haywire and everything goes wrong. And Roger Ferris actually gets captured at one point and is tortured, but Hani Salam saves him, and that's where he captures Al Salim. So that's kind of the boilerplate story plot. And while we're at it, you should know that most of this film was shot in Morocco. And pretty much Ridley Scott just loved shooting in Morocco. Like, he's done 6 or 7 films. He's comfortable there. His production designer, Arthur Max, is really good at working in those areas, working with the architecture. But at the same time, they also shot in the U.S. in certain areas like Maryland. Now, let's get into a little bit of the cast and the crew. Now, everyone knows Ridley Scott directed it. He produced it along with Donald DeLine, did the Italian Job, Pain and Gain with Michael Bay, Ready Player One with Steven Spielberg. The screenplay, again, was written by William Monahan. So if you remember, we did Kingdom of Heaven a while back. He wrote Kingdom of Heaven. So there's always this sort of interest between the West and the Middle East that he's always looking at. On top of that, he also wrote The Departed. And this film was also based on a book by David Ignatius. Now, David Ignatius was an editor at the Washington Monthly before he went over to the Wall Street Journal. And then he moved to Washington where he covered the Justice Department, the CIA, and the Senate. So he kind of has this really good understanding of everything that was going on in the Middle East during that time. The music was written by Mark Strattonfield, cinematography by Alexander Witt, production design by Arthur Max, and the film was edited by Pietro Scalia. Now I'm going through these guys really quick because they have already collaborated with Ridley Scott multiple times. The one thing I want to bring up, though, is Mark Strattonfield. Now, normally, Ridley Scott works with some really good composers. He had Vangelis for a couple of Tangerine Dream. He had Hans Zimmer, Harry Gregson Williams, and he also had Mark Strattonfield, who also did American Gangster. Now, Mark Strattonfield, he works in a lot of minor key in my perspective, and his melodies are very simple, but pretty effective. They're foreboding a lot of times, and it sometimes the motifs are just a couple of notes. But in this case, he does use some very very ethnic sounding instruments. He has like this really cool do 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 like couple note motifs using, I feel like it's a cello or an electric cello. But one of the things I wanted to bring up is basically I think Mark Strattonfield works very quickly because he works with Ridley Scott back to back 3 or 4 times, whereas Hans Zimmer might take a lot more time, or Harry Gregson Williams. So I just wanted to bring that up. Now let's talk about the cast real quick. You got Leonardo DiCaprio, Shutter Island, Gangs of New York, The Revenant. You have Russell Crowe returning. You have Mark Strong. He's one of my all-time favorites. He was in Sherlock Holmes. He was a bad guy. He was in Kingsman, The Secret Service. He's actually Merlin in that. This is actually my all-time favorite performance of his. You also have Oscar Isaac before he hit it big. If you guys don't know, I love Oscar Isaac. He was in one of my favorite Coen Brothers films, Inside Llewyn Davis. So you got kind of an all-star, well, not kind of, you got an all-star cast. You got some really great actors there. Now let's talk about the Ridley Scott collabs. Again, this is William Monahan's second collab, Russell Crowe's fourth, Alexander Witt's sixth collaboration. Alexander Witt had previously worked as a second unit camera operator on Black Rain. He was second unit DP for Gladiator, Hannibal, American Gangster, and second unit director for Black Hawk Down. So this is kind of his first foray into cinematography, like just being the DP. This is Mark Strattonfield's third score for Ridley Scott, and Pietro Scalia and Arthur Max's sixth collaboration with Ridley Scott. Wife's Corner, I really don't remember because we watched this movie so long ago, but that's okay. So, really quick, I mentioned this is my brief review. This film is underrated. It's got some really cool action scenes. It's got some really fun performances. Really great performance by Mark Strong. You have Russell Crowe hamming it up. Leonardo DiCaprio doing a southern accent, which is always fun. And, there's just a lot going on, a lot of energy behind the editing. There's a lot of these epic sweeping shots of the desert as usual. Like whenever they have a desert film, they always have to do that. And for me, this is a solid B movie with the A cast. It is not in my top 10. I think it's close to the top 20, but I mean, Ridley Scott so far has only made 27 films. So top 20 is near the end anyways. But I really enjoy this movie and it's really fun, so I definitely recommend you checking it out. let's jump into some themes. Number one, empowered female characters. Not as much in this film. There is a female love interest named Aisha, but she doesn't get that much to do. Pretty much, she's a love interest, and at one point, Roger Ferris thinks she's been taken a hostage, but she hasn't. So basically, she's an independent woman in the Middle East. And her sister is actually pretty strong, Aisha's sister in the film. And she's trying to play matchmaker, cooking food, and trying to find out what Roger Ferris's intentions for his sister are. Those are kind of the funny scenes. Those are the scenes that like kind of take you away from this spy, serious spy genre. Next up, you have nature space is a hostile and uncontrollable environment. Ding, ding, ding. Definitely. They're in the desert again. Anything could happen. If you get lost in the desert, you'll just, die of dehydration. And if someone captures you in the desert and they're driving around you really quickly, building up a sandstorm so the CIA can't track you because their cameras can't find you because you're under all this dust, and then they've got two cars, so you can go any direction, and the CI doesn't know which car you're in. Yeah, that's dangerous, and that happens in the movie. Next up, the only way to survive is to adapt. Ding, ding, ding. Why Roger Ferris is able to operate so well in the Middle East is because he immerses himself in the culture. He understands what the culture is all about. That's why his relationship with Hani Salam is so good. Whereas Ed Hoffman shows up trying to be an all tough American. You better do it my way, or you're gonna hit the highway. Actually, most of the Americans are doing a Southern accent, but basically, Hani Salam hates Ed Hoffman and loves Roger Ferris, but something happens in between and it fractures their relationship. But you have to see the movie to see what happens. But yes, definitely the only way to survive is to adapt. Next up, age does not mean a thing. Ding, ding, ding. Roger Ferris seems to be the youngest out of the whole spy gang. And then on top of that, he replaces an older Middle Eastern operative CIA officer who's older than him. So basically, he understands the culture, he understands the language, he can speak it. So that's why Ed Hoffman puts him on the top. Next up, do not trust rich people. Ding, ding, ding. In this film, the money is from the rich people and they give it to the terrorists so that they can do their operations pretty much. So that's a big plot point. Roger Ferris is trying to find someone who could be the quote unquote head of his fake terrorist organization. He does find a architect who makes a lot of money named Omar Siddiqui, and he starts funneling money around to make it look like Omar Siddiqui is actually financing this terrorist organization, and that's how Al Salim finds him, pretty much. So yes, do not trust rich people, and money is coveted. That kind of goes together. Violence don't solve a thing, brains do. Ding ding ding. Roger Ferris is all about getting on the ground, learning all he can about his opponent, and striking at the right time. And he doesn't even have to strike because he is a spy. He can get other people to do the strike, but without finding the intelligence, they can't really do anything. So that's why having the spies on the ground level is so important, especially when the terrorists, they're not using technology like Americans are. They're not, because they know, like, basically we got all these satellites. So how do I hide from a satellite? Well, number one, I don't use telephones often. If I do, I use a burner phone so they can't track me. Number two, a lot of them hide in rural areas or in homes in densely populated areas, so you can't really pinpoint. So there's all these strategies to try to keep the CIA and the Americans away from the terrorist organizations. So there you go. Happy wife, happy life. That is not as much in this film. Ed Hoffman has a wife, but she seems happy, so he seems happy. Whereas Roger Ferris, he's in the middle of a divorce, and you don't really get to see that much of his. Actually, you don't see his ex-wife at all, although she was cast. I believe her name was Carice Von Houten. If you don't know her, she was in Black Book, but like all of her scenes were cut out, so that's kind of why I didn't mention her before. Distrust of authority. Ding, ding, ding. Hani Salam distrust Ed Hoffman. Roger Ferris distrust Ed Hoffman. At one point, they all distrust each other because everyone is trying to get a one up on the other. So it's just a bunch of politics. And when politics comes into play, it's a mess, you know? So it's hard to know who you can trust, especially when you're a spy. You don't know if there's a double cross or a triple cross. Anything could be happening. Next up, Battle of the Sexes. Again, we mentioned this before. Not so much in this movie. It will show up in the next movie. So we will get into that. Do not trust robots, androids. Nope, none of those in this film. The afterlife slash death, God. Not as much in this film, but you know, when you have terrorists involved, there are a lot of people that are harmed because the terrorists are blowing up public areas, or the terrorists are shooting RPGs that are CIA operatives, you know, all these different things. But it doesn't explicitly just go into faith or religion. This movie isn't as much like Kingdom of Heaven, where there's a lot of, it's not about faith as much as it is about action and trying to protect from terrorism. Yeah, pretty much. Fascination with religion, not really, you know. There are the Muslim extremists who become the terrorists, and there's a lot of talk about that. But yeah, there's not as much religion in this particular film, not like Kingdom of Heaven, which I feel is, you know, I've mentioned this before, it's like my third favorite Ridley Scott film. It's one of his greatest epics. But overall, this film is a fun 2 hour, 8 minute film. It breezes by quickly. The action is intense. There's a lot of explosions. So let's get down to some of my favorite scenes. So I'm going to say anything with Mark Strong, any scene with Mark Strong is just incredible. This is his greatest performance yet. Like, this is the most fun he's having. He plays suave. His character is intelligent, suave, sexy, and he's just super cool. Now, any scene between Russell Crowe and Leonardo DiCaprio is just hilarious. There's a scene where Leo goes back to Washington and he's talking with Russell Crowe. And at one point, Russell Crowe is like, you know, at one time I could have kicked your ass. And he's leaning back in this metal chair, and Leonardo DiCaprio kicks the chair from under him, and Russell Crowe falls on his back. So I really like that scene. Another scene are, well, a lot of the action scenes are really fun, especially at the beginning of the film. Roger Ferris is infiltrating a terrorist cell location, and there's a little skirmish there. Roger Ferris is able to extract information as much as he can, although it's like burning the crap out of his hands because the terrorists are burning all the tapes and whatnot, and hard drives. But Roger Ferris is able to get to it before it's completely obliterated. He takes it. He gets in the car with Oscar Isaac's character, and they start driving off. Now, before they know it, these other two Humvees with like RPGs are racing behind him, and these are played by the terrorists, and they're shooting these RPGs, and then all of a sudden you get these helicopters called in by Roger Ferris that are shooting at the terrorists. All these things are exploding all over the place, and unfortunately the terrorists get one RPG off on Oscar Isaac's car. It explodes. Oscar Isaac dies. Leo is injured. And this is within the first 15 minutes. So, as you know, Leo does not die. Unfortunately, Oscar Isaac at that time had not cemented himself as an A-list star yet. So, he had to die. So, but other than that, Roger Ferris meeting Aisha for dinner with with her sister is a very funny scene. But overall, it's so hard to get into the overall plot of this because there's so much going on with the double crosses, triple crosses, new strategies. But it's really fun. I know it seems like it might be convoluted, but it's not. The story is actually very easy to follow. So that's another good thing. And yeah, overall, it's a really, really fun, underrated Ridley Scott spy genre film. And honestly, he does not come back to this genre. So overall, highly entertaining. Definitely recommend it. Can't wait for the next movie, though. The next movie, Ridley Scott is going back into another genre. And although I guess you could call this like a knight in shining armor slash sword and sandal slash medieval film, it's also jumping into England's own folklore. The next film is Robin Hood. Now, let me double check. Is Robin Hood streaming anywhere? Because if it is, I gotta let you know. Because other than that, you might have to buy it for $14.99. But it is streaming on Hulu. So next film, go check out Robin Hood on Hulu, starring Russell Crowe, Kate Blanchett, and Max Van Sydow. Just another great all-star cast. And we'll talk to you guys next time. All right, guys. Bye.